Talk about sobering news. Just yesterday, the Commerce Department reporting that in the last quarter of 2008, the U.S. economy shrank 6.2%. Why is it a big deal? Because that decline hasn't been seen in 25 years. And economists say it's a signal the recession has gone much deeper than anyone predicted. Some say this means it could last longer, too. As more and more Americans are losing their jobs, you have to wonder who is really responsible for this economic crisis. Well, this morning, we're putting together our own little wall of shame. A look at the 5 key players who carry the most blame for this downturn. And joining us to help us through this, Katie Benner of Fortune magazine. Good to have you with us this morning.
Thank you.
So let's start, and I have to say, it's not so much about having a blame game, but this really is, too, about us understanding where it started so it doesn't happen again. So if we start at the very top, who is the person who it all trickled down from, would you say?
Well, I think you'd start with Alan Greenspan. He was the chairman of the Federal Reserve. He sort of set monetary policy, and he set the tone for Wall Street. So in keeping interest rates very, very low, he made it easy for everyone to borrow, including you and me, as well as Wall Street banks. And he made credit products very tempting. But he also did not like regulation. So he made it tempting for banks to make products out of our mortgages and debt, but did not want to regulate them to make sure they weren't taking on risk.
So basically made it easier to create this subprime mess.
Exactly.
So then we go from there to Fannie Mae, which so much press on Fannie Mae, but why is this such a big player?
And as a company no one ever cared about. But the thing, if you knew that your mom and dad would always bail you out, you might take on more risk, you might behave badly, and that's what Fannie Mae did. Their mom and dad was Congress, and they felt like Congress would always bail them out.
And Frank Raines was the head of Fannie Mae during those years.
So so in taking on so much risk, it only makes sense that they did finally blow up, and that they did finally need Congress to step in and the government to step in. And they tested that promise.
And sadly, now they're not around when we need them to do what they were created to do. If we're looking at the banks, so much attention has been placed on these big banks and the way they did business. And Dick Fuld is really one of the guys who has taken a lot of heat as a representative of this category.
Exactly. It wasn't just Dick Fuld, but we have to remember after Bear Stearns went down and they were rescued by the government or forced to become part of J.P. Morgan Chase, Lehman Brothers had a chance to sell assets and take losses, which is what all of the banks should have been doing. They held out. They thought they'd get bailed out just like Bear Stearns, and at the end of the day, they did not, and it created a storm in the credit markets.
And Dick Fuld, who was the head of Lehman, let this happen. Also, he was called the gorilla of Wall Street. Also, a lot of uproar over the fact that he left with, more than $500 million in CEO compensation.
He just represents a greater problem. I mean, people are compensated when times are good, but they are not forced to give back money when it turns out they lost a lot.
When we look at the lenders and the tax lenders, Angela Mozillo, who was the head of Countrywide, created Countrywide, and I mean, their advertisements were everywhere up until seemingly a few months ago.
Right, I think there still might be a couple floating around, but the thing is that he represents this idea that you no longer need truth in lending, that lending wasn't about getting good borrowers and giving them money so they could get something they needed and they'll pay you back. It was about just inking mortgages so Wall Street could have them to make more products, and it changed the tone.
And set the low standard. And frankly, it's a standard that the American consumer, because we can't leave ourselves out here, we are also to blame on this wall of shame because we bought into a lot of this.
Right, and they couldn't have done it without us. Unless we've been borrowing money, using our credit cards, and living beyond our means, they wouldn't have had that credit to make the products that now we think of as toxic.
All right. Boy, some lessons for all of us this morning. The good news, at least we can go up from here, right? So we'll end on a positive note, that we can all take some lessons from this.
We can't get any worse.
That's right. Katie Benner, good to have you with us this morning.